It was a quiet afternoon in a small town where Officer Greg Larson, a seasoned yet often cynical cop, patrolled the streets. Greg was known for his no-nonsense attitude and strict adherence to the rules, but beneath that tough exterior lay a man with deeply ingrained prejudices he never openly admitted. That day, a call came in about a minor disturbance near a local park. Greg arrived to see a young black girl, probably no older than 16, sitting on a park bench with her backpack beside her. A shopkeeper from across the street was angrily pointing at her, claiming she had taken something from his store. Greg approached her, his eyes narrowed. "What's in the bag?" he demanded. The girl looked up, startled but calm. "Just my school stuff," she replied. "Open it," Greg barked, already convinced she was guilty. The girl hesitated, not out of guilt, but because of the sheer intimidation in his tone. She slowly opened the bag, revealing notebooks, a pencil case, and a sandwich. Greg wasn't satisfied. He pressed her harder, searching the bag himself, and even patted down her jacket pockets. Finding nothing, he still didn't let her go. "You must have ditched it," he accused, grabbing her by the arm. "You're coming with me." "Wait, I didn't do anything," she pleaded, her voice shaking. But Greg didn't listen. To him, her innocence didn't matter. She fit the profile in his mind, and that was enough. He drove her to the station, booked her, and placed her in a holding cell, all while ignoring her protests. Hours passed. The girl sat in the cold cell, scared and unsure of what would happen next. Meanwhile, Greg was at his desk, feeling a mix of satisfaction and annoyance. He didn't see her as a person with a life, a story, or someone who might actually be telling the truth. Then, everything changed. As Greg worked on his report, the station's door swung open, and in walked a tall, commanding man in a tailored suit. It was Chief Henry Caldwell, the new police chief who had taken over just a month ago. Greg stood up, trying to appear composed. "Officer Larson," Chief Caldwell said in a calm but authoritative tone. "I hear you brought someone in this afternoon. A young girl?" "Yes, sir," Greg replied. "Caught her near the park after a shoplifting complaint." "And you have evidence?" the chief asked, his eyes boring into Greg. "Well, no, but she fit the description, and—" the chief held up a hand, silencing him. "Her name is Jasmine Caldwell. She's my daughter." Greg's face turned pale. His heart sank as the realization hit him like a freight train. The girl he had treated so harshly, with no evidence and no real reason, was the daughter of his boss. Chief Caldwell didn't yell. He didn't need to. The weight of his words was enough. "You assumed she was guilty because of how she looks, didn't you? You didn't even try to verify the facts." I didn't know she was your," Greg stammered, but the chief interrupted. "That doesn't matter. Would you have treated her differently if she wasn't my daughter? Or would she just be another statistic to you?" Greg tried to defend himself, but the truth was undeniable. He had let his biases cloud his judgment, and now he was facing the consequences. Chief Caldwell walked to the holding cell and unlocked the door. Jasmine stepped out, her eyes red from crying but filled with dignity. She didn't say a word to Greg as she walked past him, but her silence was more cutting than any words could have been. The chief turned back to Greg. "We'll be having a long conversation about your future here. But first, I want you to think about the damage you've done today. Not just to Jasmine, but to yourself, to this department, and to this community." Greg sat down, his head in his hands. For the first time in years, he questioned everything about himself, his actions, his beliefs, and the kind of man he had become. It was too late to undo what he had done, but perhaps, just perhaps, it wasn't too late to change. The next day, Greg submitted a formal apology to Jasmine and her father. He also requested to attend bias training and community outreach programs. It wouldn't erase the past, but it was a step toward becoming a better officer and a better person. And as he patrolled the streets in the weeks that followed, he saw the people in his community, not as suspects, not as statistics, but as human beings with stories, struggles, and lives that deserved respect. Jasmine didn't accept Greg's apology immediately. She had every right to be angry. Her father, Chief Caldwell,
had taught her to stand up for herself, to demand respect, and to hold people accountable for their actions. She decided she wouldn't let Greg off the hook without seeing real change.
Over the next few weeks, Jasmine stayed distant, while Greg tried to prove he was serious about becoming a better person. At first, it was awkward. Greg attended the bias training sessions reluctantly, feeling out of place as his deeply ingrained prejudices were laid bare in front of strangers. But slowly, the stories shared by others in the room began to resonate with him. He learned about the fear and pain people like Jasmine faced daily. He heard from parents who had to teach their kids to be careful around people like him. Officers who were supposed to protect them but often did the opposite. The weight of those stories lingered in his mind long after the sessions ended. Chief Caldwell, too, watched him closely. He didn't go easy on Greg, assigning him to community outreach programs in the neighborhoods he once patrolled with a heavy hand. It was here that Greg started seeing the real impact of his actions. One day, while volunteering at a local youth center, Greg saw Jasmine again. She was tutoring younger kids, her usual calm and composed demeanor masking the pain he knew he had caused. Greg hesitated, unsure whether to approach her, but eventually, he walked over. "Hey, Jasmine," he said quietly. She looked up briefly, then returned her attention to the child she was helping. "I'm busy," she said curtly. "I just wanted to say, I'm trying," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I know I can't undo what I did. But I'm working to be better. I hope someday you'll believe me."
Jasmine didn't respond, but he noticed the way her shoulders softened, just a little. Over time, Greg's actions spoke louder than his words. He became a regular at the youth center, not just as an officer but as someone who wanted to give back. He helped with events, taught kids about their rights, and even started organizing workshops on how to interact with law enforcement safely.
Jasmine, ever observant, began to notice the small changes in him. He no longer carried himself with the same arrogance. Instead, there was humility in his posture, in the way he listened, and in the effort he put into understanding the community he had once judged. One evening, after a long day at the youth center, Jasmine approached him. "Officer Larson," she started, her voice firm but not unkind.
"Greg," he corrected gently. "Greg," she said, nodding. "I see you've been trying. And, I think my dad's right. People can change if they're willing to put in the work. But this isn't about earning forgiveness. It's about making sure no one else has to go through what I did." He nodded, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Jasmine. I'll keep working, I promise." Their conversation marked the beginning of a cautious truce. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a step forward. Months later, Greg was back at the station, this time giving a presentation to his fellow officers about what he had learned. He shared stories from the youth center, the bias training, and his interactions with Jasmine. "The way we see people matters," he said, his voice steady. "We have a responsibility to do better, for them and for ourselves. And if we can't see that, we don't deserve to wear this badge." Chief Caldwell, standing at the back of the room, watched in silence. He could see that Greg had come a long way, but he also knew the journey wasn't over. Jasmine, too, kept an eye on him. She wasn't quick to forget, but she could see the man he was trying to become. And for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope, that maybe, just maybe, people could change if they were willing to face their mistakes head-on. Greg's transformation wasn't perfect, but it was real. And in the end, that was what mattered.